David Russell once said, "The hardest thing to learn in life is which bridge to cross and which to burn." The decisions you make today determine the life you live tomorrow. You are not a product of the circumstances. You are a product of your decisions. My today's guest is the ultimate decision scientist and performance enhancer. His expertise on how to perform at utmost potential has been sought after by some of the most successful individuals, such as the billionaire senior Richard Branson and Steve Wozniak. Today we will be talking about why it's a very bad idea to do too many things at once, and why even good people make bad decisions, and what is the constraint theory and how we can use it to make better decisions. Please welcome a world-renowned expert in decision-making field, Dr. Alan Barnard. Hi, Alan. Thank you for coming on Contributors Podcast.
Hi, Victor. It's a great honor to be here.
Thank you for coming. And according to Simon Sinek, the true test of leader is how they function when constraints are present. Could you explain in plain English what is the constraint theory and how we can use it to make better decisions?
Sure. So when you think about an organization, there's a goal of the organization, and that goal determines what resources you need to achieve that goal. But it also determines the extent of the resources that you need. So if you have a goal to make $1 million by providing a specialist services like a marketing agency, or you have a goal of making $10 million by manufacturing some kind of widget, those goals will dictate what resources you need and how much of each of them you need. A constraint is simply a resource that you don't have enough of to achieve the goal that you've set for yourself. And a constraint can only be really in 5 areas. And it's important to understand that these, kind of from an analyst point of view, should happen in sequence, in the following sequence. So you've set the goal. The first question you have, whether you are a for-profit organization or for purpose, will be to ask yourself, do I have enough customers that want to buy my product or service to achieve the goal that I've set for myself? If you don't have enough customers to achieve the goal, you can guess what is the one thing to focus on, is to make sure you find a way of attracting enough customers that would be willing to buy your product or service. The next question is, do you have enough capacity internally to reliably deliver your product or service to satisfy enough customers to meet the goal? If you say no, then guess that is the one thing you should focus on, is how to get more capacity. The third one is, do you have enough supply of whatever you need? It could be raw materials or components or a specific skill set or something else, in order to produce enough of these services or products to satisfy enough customers to meet your goal. If you say no, then that would be the one thing to focus on, is make sure you can get enough supply. And then the fourth one is cash. Do you have enough cash to be able to buy enough of whatever you need to produce enough? The last one, which took us a long time to kind of realize, the ultimate constraint in the business is management attention. If you think about it, and all the listeners and viewers think about it, the number of things that demand our attention will always exceed our available attention. Attention is even scarcer than time. If you think about it, you have about 24 hours a day in time. Now the question is, how much attention do you have? If you say, no, I don't have enough available attention, then that is the one thing to focus on. Now, what theory of constraints or constraint theory says is every system will have at least one constraint, or the bottleneck. In more specific terms, our limited attention is the real constraint. Then how do I exploit my limited attention? Is I have to make sure I don't make bad decisions, because bad decisions ended up wasting our limited attention. We must stop doing things that are not helping. We must start the things that are actually helping, and we must do it in the right way, right? Don't multitask, single task. And of course, the last part is we have to learn from experience. Every decision that we make, we should treat as an experiment. And here's an important thing for the listeners and viewers. We do not learn from experience. We learn from experiments. You have to think about every decision you make as an experiment, right? And there's 2 criteria to make something an experiment. Firstly, you have an hypothesis or an idea that you want to test. So think about touching a hot stove plate, right? What are you testing? You're testing, is it okay to touch this thing, right? That's the first criteria.
Right.
So when you're doing an experiment, for example, in the market, you say, we assume that by adding this additional feature to our product or service, more customers would be willing to pay more, buy more frequently. How can I test that, right? What's the simplest experiment I can do to go and test that? But there's a second criteria for a good experiment, and it's called fast feedback. So imagine touching that hot stove plate, and it only burnt you an hour later, or a day later, or a week later. How long will it take you to connect these two elements, right? And that's one of the practical challenges that we have as entrepreneurs and business owners. Often the effect of our actions or decisions is only visible much, much later. So we have to think about, how can I get fast feedback about this decision that I've made, which I'm thinking about as an experiment. How can I get fast feedback? The faster the feedback, the faster to learn. So the connection between theory of constraints and decision making is that our ultimate constraint is our limited attention. And I want to make sure I don't waste that limited attention on making bad decisions. I want to make good decisions, and every decision I make, I'm going to treat as an experiment. And how can I get fast feedback? So for me, theory of constraints is kind of like focus and fast feedback. Focus on the constraint, get fast feedback about whether your decisions about how to better exploit or elevate that constraint, is it actually working, yes or no?
So how you getting faster feedback? Because it's a great, very vivid example with the hot stove. You touch it in real life, you get feedback right away, but in real life, you touch it and you get feedback maybe in 1 week or 1 month. So how can we make it faster? What is the key?
Well,
what is
I'll give you a very practical example. In the old days, if you were in marketing and you placed an advertisement in a newspaper or a magazine or even on television, you really struggled to know whether that advert has actually resulted in more sales, right? Because there was no fast feedback. Never mind fast, there was just no feedback. You had no way of really linking, unless you had a call center. People phone in and you would ask them, where did you hear about us? And they say, I've just, gone through the magazine or saw you. That was the only type of feedback. Today's technology, you place an ad on Facebook and you can track very accurately exactly where it came from. And you can get very fast feedback about this experiment that you've tried, which is, I've built this ad and I'm hoping that this will be convincing for people to buy my product or service. I can get fast feedback. So it's almost that type of thing, is how can I utilize technology to get fast feedback about whether something that I'm doing is working or not working.
I see, yeah. Gotcha. So technology will help to get this feedback.
Yeah, but it won't be automatic. I need to think of everything as kind of an experiment to learn from, whether it's working or not. I love one of Jay Abrams' quotes. He said, if you remember in the session that we both attended, he said that somebody asked him, how do you know you're making progress in your life?
Oh, wow.
And it's a really good question. And he said for him, every day he's making progress.
I always knew that multitasking is bad, but I never actually thought how actually bad it is. Can you explain to our viewers why it is even worse than anybody can think, and how it actually affects our decision-making process and productivity and other things?
I want you to think about 3 tasks that you are going to do. We can call them A, B, and C. And these tasks are each about 10 days long, right? So if you didn't have a constraint, you could do these 3 tasks in parallel, and you could complete all 3 in 10 days, right? So you stack them on top of each other, A, B, and C. Each of them is 10 days long, and you'd be able to do them all 3 in 10 days. But if you are required to work on each of those, and there's only one of you, you have to make a decision. How am I going to do these tasks? One way of doing it would be to do A, and then to do B, and then to do C. Now, if you had to also make commitments on when will you have A and B and C completed, you would say to promise to your customer or to whoever you are doing the task for to say, task A will be completed after 10 days. Task B, I'll start on day 11, I'll complete it on day 20. And task C, I will start on day 21 and I will complete it on day 30. So if there was some inherent sequence that's important to follow, like A is the highest priority, you would want to do that one first because you want to finish it first, and then B, and then C. But we all have pressure to show that we are being fair and that we are treating these tasks equally, and everybody wants us to give their task highest priority. So what do we end up doing? Rather than doing A, B, and C, we do a little bit of A, and then a little bit of B, and then a little bit of C. So think about that picture, right? A, B, C. Maybe we do 1 day of A, 1 day of B, 1 day of C, and then we go back to A again. We do 1 day of A, 1 day of B, 1 day of C. Now, if in reality there was no switching cost, so we didn't lose any time when we switched from A to B, which in reality is of course not true, we lose up to 50% of the time in actually switching. But let's assume best case scenario, right? You're going to do in that first 10 days, you'll do ABC, ABC, ABC. So you'll end up, if you're lucky, still doing it in 30 days, but you'll finish C on day 30, you'll finish B on day 29, and day C on day 28. Does it make sense? If you were perfectly multitasking every single day, you were switching.
There is no time wasted on switch.
Now, in reality, when we add the switching cost, if we ask people to play this game, rather than that taking 30 days, it takes 60 days. That's how much time we're losing getting our mind to switch, right? And there's two penalties that we pay. The one is, I'm going to B, I have to figure out where was I? Why on earth would we multitask? So if you remember that, our highest priority project would have finished in 10 days if we were single tasking. How long will it take us to finish that project if we are multitask? It'll take 28 days. That is 3 times as long to finish our highest priority project. Crazy, right? Now, of course, in reality, it won't be 28 days. It will probably be 58 days if we count in all the switching costs, right?
Because some other things coming, which we didn't expect.
So you asked me to say, why is it even worse than people think? Well, when you think about it, so on our highest priority item, we are spending at least 3 times as long on it, and sometimes 6 times as long as what it could have taken. That's the first, oh my goodness, right? The second thing is, when you think about it from a cash flow perspective, most businesses, right, even the larger businesses, want to manage their cash very, very carefully, right? Now, if you think about single tasking, you only need the cash to start A. You get the cash back once you complete B, you use it to start. But think about if you're multitasking, you need the cash to start A, B, and C almost from day one. And then you have to wait until day 28 and 29 and 30 before you get any cash back.
And you need to pay 3 times more to the worker
exactly.
and
Everything is taking longer, right? You're getting much less done. But there's even another one that makes it even worse. So, Victor, imagine somewhere halfway through the process, right? You're busy multitasking, and I come to you and I say, Victor, I need you to do this for me, right? I give you a 4th thing to work on, which is called D. And of course, you want to be a good person, so you say, okay. Now the question is, what will be the impact of this? You will immediately start also now doing D. So not only you will do ABC, you'll do ABCD and then ABCD. So by adding this 4th thing, it's going to cause everything to take much longer and you'll get less done. Whereas if we were single tasking and I gave you this 4th thing to do, you could say, Alan, I'm pretty confident that I will probably be able to start yours on day 31. And this type of job takes about 10 days. So I'll be able to finish it on day 4. And you'll be very accurate in your estimation. Whereas if you are busy multitasking, you have no idea. All that you know, if you were honest, it will take much longer to get everything done. You don't know, is it going to be 40 days, 50, 60, 90, 120 days?
My goodness, that's so true. I used to have a software development company and I didn't understand why we're always missing the deadlines. Even though I ask my developers, how much will it take you? He always tell me, okay, let's say 2 weeks. I always double it, sometimes even triple it. And
And
still
that's
we
still not
always
enough.
been
You're
behind.
absolutely right, because
Right.
when you are busy multitasking, you're working on multiple things, there's no way of accurately predicting how long it will take.
Right, but if I let the developer do one by one the project, he will be pretty much accurate. My goodness, this is like epiphany, I think, for millions of people. Just don't
Yeah.
multitask, then your prediction will be much, much closer
Now,
and your customer will be
I
happy.
ask, but the question is, why do people, even if they know how bad it is, why do they keep multitasking? And there's a couple of reasons, but the two
Right.
that's most dominant is we assume that the sooner I start something, the sooner I will finish it. The only time when starting
That's
something
mind-boggling.
earlier will finish it earlier is if I'm working on one task. Then it's true. But as soon as I'm working on two or more things at the same time, that assumption is simply not true.
Wow, and this is not so not obvious.
Yeah,
And talking about obvious things, right? So,
yeah.
Alan, you have taught hundreds of most influential corporations in the world, like Microsoft, Coca-Cola, IBM, and Siemens, and how to make them right decisions. So, give us an example of an interesting area on which you are focused on, and which is very obvious when you point out, but profound obvious, like to most people.
Sure.
So people really don't see that way, like you
So
just said.
we had the opportunity to work with the largest book publisher in the world. So I think most people have got good intuition because we read books, we buy books online, etc. And they initially approached me and said, we have a big problem. 40% of every book that we print comes back to us for shredding. Now just think about it, sits there on the shelves. At some point in time, it comes back for shredding. So you've paid the printing cost, you've paid the distribution cost there and the distribution cost back. So one of the first questions I always ask people, if they share with me some wicked problem they have in their business. A wicked problem is simply a problem that has been around for a long time, right? I said to them, why does this problem still persist? Because 40% is very high, but they told me they're the best in the industry. Other book publishers, the return rate was 50 and sometimes 60%. So I said, help me understand. This problem persists because either you think it's not possible to solve it, that it's an impossible problem to solve. It's just one of those costs you have to pay to push the books to be in the retailer, right? And you can't accurately forecast. So some books will come back. So what we did was we built a simulation model of their supply chain. And the first thing that we realized, they thought that this was a $150 million problem a year because that's a cost of the wasted printing cost and distribution cost. It turns out that these books that come back, 50% of the shelf space of a bookshop occupied by books that will actually come back. Now imagine you're a bookshop,
Right.
and you have to try to make money with half the space that you pay for and half the cash that you get.
Right.
That's why so many
Right.
bookstores have had to close down. It's simply not possible to make money if you have that high level of return rate. So now how do you solve the problem? I asked them a simple question. When you first launch a book, how much does your customers order? And they say, well, we asked them to order about 3 months of what they think will be the demand. 3 months, right? So this is again a mindset of our printers is the constraint. I don't want my printers to constantly switch. So when I'm making a print run, I want them to print enough that they don't lose time with switching from one book to the other. That rule, by the way, like with a multitasking rule, is absolutely true if you have a printing constraint. Then it's the best way to run it. But they don't have a printing constraint. There's lots of printing capacity, but they still use this rule, and it's causing the whole system damage. Why? Because I asked them, I said, how frequently can you send products to the bookshops? They said almost every day. So I said, why are you then asking them to order 3 months of books when you have no idea how much of this book will sell?
Right.
So why don't we just order from tomorrow when
1
we
week.
launch them? We say 1 week. Tell us the most you think you
Right.
will sell in 1 week, and we'll ship
Right.
you
1
that.
week.
And we will already start measuring your actual sales on day one, so we get fast feedback, right? Remember, that was a key criteria. We're launching this book. It's
Right.
an experiment. I'm hoping it will do well, but I don't. That's my focus. Treating it as an experiment. How do I get fast feedback? I'm going to measure from day one, am I selling at the rate that I expected? And if I'm not, I won't ship more. more. If I am, I'll ship
Right.
more. So I get fast feedback. And that means that less of my shelf space and less of my cash is now occupied with stuff that won't sell. And that simple change was enough to double the net profit.
So Theodore Roosevelt once said, in any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing, and the next best thing is the wrong thing, and the worst thing you can do is nothing.
Yeah.
Can you tell us why good people, professionals, often make and repeat bad decisions, and how to stop that from happening?
So here's something to remember is that good people make bad decisions for good reasons. Right? We have to find out what those good reasons are and change it. Right? So let me give you two examples. We often make the mistake of overreacting, right? Maybe somebody says something that we found very disrespectful. And even though we promised ourselves we'll never lose our temper, we end up losing our temper, right? Or we promise ourselves that I'm never going to go onto a crash diet again until I get on a scale and I think, oh my goodness, I've picked up so much weight, and I overreact and I go on a crash diet. Even though I know that, yes, you will lose weight with whatever diet you go on, whether it's the watermelon diet or keto or whatever, you'll lose weight, right? Because you're limiting your calories and you're paying attention to it. But you're probably just going to pick it up again and maybe even more. Or you overreact by a small competitor coming into your market and offering a similar product or service than you provide at a lower price. And you immediately overreact by also lowering your price. And now it's a race to the bottom. So those are three examples of why we overreact, right? That's the bad decision. But why do we do it? And the main reason why we overreact is we have either an exaggerated frustration or fear about the current status quo, or we have an exaggerated expectation of the future after we've made the change, after we reacted. So whenever you feel like, oh my goodness, I might be overreacting to this, ask yourself why. Is the frustration I have with the status quo, is it really true? Or could I be exaggerating it? And that could be, a decision like, I need to quit my job, I want a divorce, or I'm, going to change this product. Is like, what is causing my frustration? And could it be that I'm overreacting? And the same with the expectation. Could it be that my expectation of whatever action I'm taking, could it be that it's maybe a bit exaggerated, right? And here's one of the challenges that we have in decision making. For many years, we thought that the decision-making process works in the following two steps. Step number one is we look at reality objectively, we look at all the things, and then we decide. It turns out that actually how our minds work is just the opposite. We decide using emotion, and then we justify using logic. So we make a decision. For example, I can make a decision the first time I met you that Victor is a trustworthy person. As soon as I make that decision, my mind will start building up evidence to confirm my decision. The mind is simply a validation engine. It's actually really hard work to invalidate an assumption or belief that I have. We have to actually go out of our way and remind ourselves to pay attention to something that is contradicting our decision. So when I feel like I am justified to lose my temper, to quit my job, to get a divorce, to go on that, all that the mind now does is it puts glasses on with filters that will find evidence to support my decision. I hope that makes sense to everybody. You literally have to change your glasses and say, is there any evidence that tells me that losing my temper right now is not a good idea? What is the outcome that you want? And is this the best response? Is going on a crash diet really a good idea? What's the outcome you want? Is this a good response? And this is something I want to give to all the listeners and viewers. A very simple way of thinking about any decision. Make sure it's important, right? Make sure it's something that you can actually do about it. And then you decide, okay, what should be my response? I shouldn't overreact. I shouldn't underreact. And in order to decide what's your response, you should think about the outcome that you want and then try to evaluate what's the best possible response. And for that, we've developed some tools and also even an app that people can download for free from the App Store. It's called the Harmony Decision Maker, and that will guide them through these simple steps to avoid the most common decision mistakes that we all make.
Wow, that's cool. I need to try myself. Dear viewers, if you like this conversation and you found it insightful, please like and share with your friends, subscribe, and hit the bell below to get notified about our new guests. Thank you. And we're moving forward, and my next question would be, so one of my favorite books is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Yes.
Because I totally agree with the main idea of the book. The only true limitation is that which you set upon yourself. Alan, what we need to do to make impossible possible and achieve much more and much faster?
One of the things that I have always been really passionate about is how do you achieve impossible goals? How do you make impossible decisions, right? And it's a very difficult problem to solve because as soon as I decide that something is impossible, guess what I do? I don't even try. So often what we have realized is that actually saying that something is impossible is a protection mechanism. It protects us from the effort that might be required, and it also protects us from the possibility of failure. So for many years, I was trying to find the simplest possible method or even question that can help somebody disrupt their mind and move from it's impossible to possible. And how do you do that? Now, I want everybody to ask themselves that question, right? Think about a goal that is so ambitious that you call it impossible, and then you ask yourself, it's impossible unless. What happens to the mind? It immediately starts working on solving this problem. It's trying to say there's a gap. What are the conditions, those unless conditions, that if I could satisfy them, suddenly the impossible becomes possible, right? And that question turned out to be absolutely profound, because you can apply it to anything that you think is impossible. I had a few months ago, I was very fortunate to be invited by Joe Polish to be interviewed by him on his Genius Network. And he said, give me an example. I said, well, what's a goal that you think is impossible? And he said, well, I'm just launching a new book, called What's in It for Them. And my impossible goal is I want to sell 1 million copies. But I think it's impossible. I've never come close to that. So I said to him on stage, I said, it's impossible unless, and immediately I could see him starting to smile, right? Because now you're thinking about it. You haven't given yourself an excuse to stop thinking by calling it impossible, right? Now you start thinking about it. And he said, unless I could get Oprah Winfrey, to put it on her book club. I said, absolutely. What else, right? And he started listing those conditions. And suddenly that's the way of making the impossible possible.
This is freaking genius. That's amazing. And I heard that you have a book with such a name, right? Like it's impossible.
It's called It's Impossible Unless, and it's about these simple type of methods that we can use on how do we go about achieving goals that we think is impossible or decisions that we think is impossible to make.
Gotcha. So dear viewers, so if you want to really learn how to achieve impossible, I think that this book will be very helpful. So I will provide the link in the description below so you can download it. Awesome. Thank you. So Alan, what is your life story? How all this started? Who or what influenced you to become a decision scientist and theory of constraint expert? Because this is such a, I don't know anyone in this area, only you. How did you start?
Well, I grew up, in South Africa. We were a family that, were very, very kind of came by with minimum resources. We were not wealthy, went to public schools. Nobody in my family, direct family at least, had graduated from university. And I was very close with my grandfather. And he gave me books of very successful people to read. And one of my most prized possessions was this book, a very thick book called the Marquis Who's Who List. And it was basically a book of biographies of some of the most amazing minds and successful people in the world, and sort of telling their brief story. And what struck me was there was not one person in that book that didn't have to overcome some major adversity, right? Some major obstacles in life. So that gave me a tremendous amount of hope. as a young kid that had very little, is to say others have shown that it's possible, right? And then I read this quote by Henry Ford, and you have probably heard of it. It's one of those quotes when you read it, you just immediately knew this is true. He said that whether you believe you can do something or whether you believe you can't do something, you are right.
Right. Yeah. This is
And
very deep. And
I thought,
true,
wow,
right?
this is profound. So if I believe I can perform well or I believe I can't, how can that make a difference, right? And I immediately realized, unless you think that the universe cares about you and magically, it waves a magic wand and says, because you believe you will get it. Of course, I wish it worked like that. Unfortunately, it doesn't, at least my understanding. But what it does is to say, if you believe that you can do something, at least you will try it. And if it's really important to you, you will give it your full attention, right? And when you give it your full attention and you don't get distracted with multitasking, and you treat it as an experiment, and every time you try it, you learn something, what worked, what didn't work. Practically speaking, I can see how that can dramatically increase your probability of succeeding at anything that you are willing to try. And that made a profound impact on me. So I started really understanding what makes successful people successful. And I realized it was very little to do with their starting conditions. It had everything to do with their starting assumptions. And their starting assumptions was, I can do this. I deserve to succeed. I am good enough, etc. And it's very interesting. I had this opportunity to be invited by Sir Richard Branson to Necker Island, and I remember sitting down with him the one evening, and we had an opportunity to ask some questions. And I said, when did you realize that your learning disabilities, because, he had suffered from dyslexia, also felt like he was the stupidest kid. They kept on pushing him back in the classroom. I said, when did you realize that starting condition, you were unlucky to be born with this kind of thing, right? It's not nice to have a learning disorder. You were born with it. But when did you realize it wasn't going to hold you back, despite you having the starting condition? And he said it's a fascinating question because he was reading a book one day, and normally he really struggled with reading. But somehow he found himself reading this book and he wasn't struggling that much. And it's like, why? And he realized it was because he was reading something that he found interesting and important. And I think that's so true for all of us, right? Life is hard, right? So pick something that you find interesting and important, and it will make life a little bit easier.
That's so true. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for coming on the show. If our viewers want to connect with you, to ask you questions, how they can find you?
Sure. My social media handle is just Dr. Alan Barnard. So ALANBARNARD. So you can find me on social media with Dr. Alan Barnard. My website, personal website, is just dralanbarnard.com. And once they connect with me, they can direct message me, and I'd love to help. I also have a YouTube channel, again, that they can find it on the Dr. Alan Barnard, where I share a lot of the research insights that we gain to make it as accessible to as many people as possible. And then, as I mentioned, we have a few apps. So Harmony Decision Maker is the simplest one. It's available on all the mobile app stores and also as a web app. They can download it. It's free.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alan, for coming on the Contributors Podcast and sharing with us all your wisdom. Thank you.
You're so welcome, and thank you so much for the invitation again.
My dear friends, if you have questions for Dr. Barnard, you can leave a comment below, or you can follow the link I will put in the description, so you can go on his website and connect with him directly. If you like this video, please like and share, subscribe, and hit the bell below to be notified about a new guest. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy, stay wealthy, stay tuned. Thank you.